Sometimes the light of Christ shines brightest when it bleeds through the cracks of a broken heart. Real people, real stories of hope for the hurting, and triumph over tragedy through faith in Jesus Christ. This is Out of the Grave with Rob and Dave. Hey everybody, welcome to another installment of Out of the Grave with Rob and Dave.
I'm Rob.
I'm Dave. And we have a very special guest. We have a very special guest on the show today. A good brother of ours, David Stoecker. David, thank you so much for being on the show. We really appreciate it, man.
It's my pleasure to be here. Love sharing my story and what God's done in my life. So,
now you have a ministry that you started, Hope Dealer. Can you tell us a little bit about that, real quick here?
I actually have a nonprofit called Better Life and Recovery.
Oh, okay.
And basically, I started that because I looked around my community, and there really wasn't a lot of positive, family-friendly, pro-social activities to engage in that didn't center around alcohol at one place or another. I mean, anymore you can't even go to the zoo without seeing alcohol. And I worked in the recovery field. I am a person in long-term recovery, and I kind of wanted a place either where people, didn't have to be around that, or if we went to a place where there was alcohol or other drugs, that we went as a group. So it started off us doing events. It ended up growing to the point that me and two other partners opened up the Springfield Recovery Community Center. Like last year, we did over 800 groups and events. And now the Hope Dealer part, I have a book that's called Hope Dealer. So, and it's tattooed on my arm, and it's on most of the gear and the merch that we sell. It's, I believe that anybody who's overcome something and then uses their story to give hope to somebody else that's stuck, that's down in the trenches, is a hope dealer. It doesn't matter if you're a cancer survivor, domestic violence survivor, substance use, depression, whatever it may be. If you're willing to use that story to give other people hope, that's what makes somebody a hope dealer.
Amen. Amen. Wow.
Yeah, that is so true. I mean, I was having a conversation with a former pastor of mine a few years ago, and I felt the Lord call me to speak. And I said, man, I'm not a theologian. I don't have a Bible degree. I don't know what I'm doing. And I said, really, all I do is encourage people. And, she said, that is so needed right now. Because people are just so down there. Sometimes I will message somebody on Facebook, simple message, hey, praying for you. And that will mean so much, And so, I mean, sometimes that's all it takes. I mean, in these crazy dark times.
Yeah, absolutely. That's all it takes, Now, David, if you're cool with it, give us kind of a rundown of, your upbringing. And I know it's your testimony is very, very powerful. So, we want to basically, we want to know where you came from and, how you overcame all of that. And obviously that defining moment when you realized that you needed Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior.
Yeah. So a lot of times what I do is, I'm sure people, haven't listened to your show. I hate to say it, but I'm going to. I didn't really even know about it until Rob had reached out to me. So
we're still kind of new into it. This is probably what, episode number 8, I think, 8 or 9?
8. Yeah, 8? I think it's 8.
8. Okay.
So I'm not sure the content on it normally. So a lot of times what I do is kind of give an activation warning. I'm going to talk about some things that are traumatic, but I won't get into great detail about them. When I speak in churches, kind of what Rob had said, I'm a teacher, not a preacher. Like, my voice doesn't change when I get in front of people. And I think that it's vitally necessary for us to be able to talk about some of the things that I'm going to talk about. But, when I speak in church, I say, you know what, we're going to talk about things you don't normally talk about in church, right? Like my first memory is being molested by a babysitter. I was probably 3 years old. It went on for several years. I grew up in a house where my dad, back then they would have called him a functioning alcoholic, which basically meant his 70% was as good as everybody else's 99.
Wow.
And I had a mom that did not like my dad's drinking. And because of that, we ended up leaving the first week of 5th grade. We moved from Peoria. My mom took us to her parents' house, which is about an hour and a half school bus ride from there to Branson. And it's a place called Round the Mountain Road. And I say my grandpa was probably the most evil person I've ever met in my life. He was the kind of person that would wake up in the morning and say, before this day is over, one of you's getting beat talking to me and my brother.
Wow.
And he was the kind of person that would beat us until to the point that he would call into school and say, hey, he's going to help me out in the fields this week. He won't be in, or, he's sick. I always say I knew things were going to be different, like very soon after I moved there. Like my mom was a switch person. When we were kids, my dad was not a disciplinarian at all. My dad was probably more like the buddy. We go out and play in the yard, play catch in the yard. My mom was the disciplinarian, but my dad had a green thumb. We lived on like a double lot in Peoria, and the second lot was a huge garden that my dad had made. But my dad was not mechanically inclined at all, and unfortunately, he passed that on to me. I know how to push on a gas pedal and a brake, and look and see if a light's on that tells me something's wrong with the vehicle, right? So, so my grandpa, on the other hand, he had, over 1,000 acres and a big shop. And I'd probably been there maybe a week, and I was helping him in the shop. And he said, hey, David, go over and get me. I don't know what it was. It might've been like a 5/8 wrench or something, or a socket. And I came back with something that wasn't what he asked for. And, he's like, you're an idiot. Go get me what I asked for. And I came back with something else that wasn't what he asked for. And he said, go get me what I asked for. And when I turned around to go get it, I kind of snickered because I thought it was funny. And the next thing I remember is waking up with like a metallic taste in my mouth. And as I looked around, I'm on a concrete shop floor. I'd busted my lip and my nose and was bleeding. And that's what I was tasting, trying to figure out what happened. And I saw my grandpa have one of those great big metal thermoses. It was laying right next to me. So as I'd walked away and snickered, he'd picked that thing up, chucked it, hit me in the back of the head, and I just hit face first into the concrete.
Wow.
So from there, my dad ended up getting custody of us. We lived there for about 1.5 years. It was the summer before 7th grade. My dad got custody of me. And we moved to Highland, which is a little town in Illinois. And my dad worked overnights at the time. My dad had gotten sober. He turned his life around, started his own business. And I remember, he stayed with me for like a week, and he's like, hey, I'm going to have to go to work. Just know that if you wake up in the middle of the night, door's locked, I'll be here first thing in the morning with donuts. And I was like, awesome, Dad, I'll see you in the morning. And he left, and I took a walk. And I bumped into a kid on the square. We lived a couple blocks from the square. I bumped into a kid that was about my age. Started talking to him. Turns out we were both going into 7th grade. And then his big brother called me over and asked me a question that I always say I think there's only one answer to, which is, are you cool? And I was like, yeah, I'm cool. Because I really liked the way that sounded. I'd never been cool before. I was a kid that wore hand-me-downs and, always kind of looked down on, especially going to Branson and being an outsider, where so many of the kids there came from families that had so much money. Mm-hmm. And because I also had this theme throughout my entire life that I was disgusting. It started with my babysitter that molested me because I was disgusting if I reacted that way to what was done to me. And then my grandpa would tell me I was an idiot and I was disgusting. So I actually thought that my grandpa knew what had happened with the babysitter, and that's why he was beating me and so mean to me.
Wow.
So yeah, I liked being cool. And he said, do you smoke? And I was like, yeah, because I'd been stealing my grandpa's cigarettes. And then they passed around something that wasn't a cigarette that contained tobacco. And after like the 3rd or 4th hit of that, I stopped thinking about all of the trauma that I'd gone through. And the next night I met up with the same group of kids. They introduced me to alcohol. I discovered the exact same thing. The more I drank, the less I thought about the past. And I found out pretty quickly that if I stayed intoxicated in one state or another, that not only did the past not hurt me, but nobody could hurt me today. And I really liked the way that felt.
Right.
So I don't like to get into big, long war stories. So I just say over the next 24 years, I'd drop out of high school. I turned 21 in prison. I've been shot, stabbed. I've died 8 times and been brought back. And throughout that entire time, I might have gone, I think the longest I went outside of a residential rehab, the one that I didn't use in was after I got out was about a week and a half without using anything at all. But in that, I tell people that I never had a drug problem. And, you know, you guys have kind of heard my stories, so you guys know, but I'm generally like, I didn't have a drug problem. Why do you think I might say that? And people are like, you're in denial. And I'm like, no, I'm not still in denial. I've been in recovery for over a decade now, you know, but there's this thing, it's called the ACEs survey. And the ACEs survey, ACEs stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences Survey. And it asks 10 questions before you were 18. Did you experience? And it's like, did you experience sexual, physical violence? Did somebody have a substance use disorder in your house? Did somebody go to jail or prison in your house? You know, were there days that you didn't know whether or not you'd have clean clothes or access to food? And what they discovered is that if somebody scores a 4 on that, they are 12 times more likely to attempt suicide when they get older, and they're 7 times more likely to have an alcohol use disorder. And if somebody scores a 6, they're 46 times. So that's like 4,600% more likely to inject illicit drugs. And their life expectancy is 20 years shorter than somebody that scores a 0.
Oh, wow.
So I scored a 9 on that. I've always been an overachiever. You know, I'm like, my mom said, you're going to grow up to be an alcoholic just like your dad. Drugs. She said, you're going to go to jail just like your brother. Prison. You know, I've always kind of been an overachiever at underachieving. So, but you know, for me, that was a big thing when I realized that years later. What I realized is people kept trying to take the drugs from me. And I realized it's what we do a lot in our communities too. You know, like I see them trying to take substance misuse and substance use disorders to work on those and have people stop using drugs, which are probably the only things that are keeping them alive. Because what they really need to do is address whatever the reason is that they're compelled to use drugs chaotically.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The underlying issues. Absolutely. And you know, as you were saying that, I was thinking the same thing. I'm like, you know, there's a lot of places out there. Oh yeah, you know, we'll help you get off the drugs. You know, all you need to do, you just need to quit. Just quit, you know, cold turkey, whatever. Just don't do it no more. Instead of like you said, addressing, you know, those underlying issues. What caused you to do this? What caused you to get to this point? And, you know, whatever those issues are, okay, let's work on them. Let's find out what happened. Let's find out what we can do to get you over that, you know, to get you past that and through it and get you on a good path. And not too many people take that approach, it seems.
Right.
No, I even look.
You know, people use a lot of different things. It's not just drugs and alcohol, as you guys know. You know, my daughter watches that show 600, you know, my 600-pound life. And man, every single time there's some kind of trauma.
Yeah.
You know, and that's what they have to get down to, get to the heart of. And people that they want to bury that. And, you know, as you were saying that, try to bury that. I mean, I remember that feeling. I remember as a kid, I say kid, 15, you know, whatever, you know, feeling like, wow, this feels really good. I mean, I don't have to think about all that garbage right now. And, you know, I think that, and you probably, I'm sure you know a lot more than we do, but that is something that's really hard to overcome in an addict, is the fact that, man, you know, it feels so good and I don't have to think about all that darkness.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you know, when I go and speak in schools, I always say, you know, I start off by saying, hi, my name is David. They brought me in here to talk to you about drugs. And I just want you to know I love drugs and I love the way they make me feel. And then I stop and pause and just kind of look around at like the teachers who are looking at each other like, who the heck did we bring in here?
Right.
And then after about a 20-second pause, I say, but I hate the person they turned me into over time. And that's what I'm here to talk to you about. Because you're right. When we grow up, they're like, drugs are bad. Just say no, drugs suck. And the first time you try them, you're like, holy cow, this feels amazing.
Right.
Like, where's this been all my life? Either, for some people, it might make them more social because maybe they have some social anxiety. For somebody else, it may help them with their depression or their anxiety. So there's all these different things, and we need to be a little bit more honest if we're going to work on it.
Yeah. Oh, right. Because even the Bible says that sin has its pleasure for a season. Mm-hmm. It doesn't come across and say, oh, it's make you miserable or whatever, and obviously it shows what happens. But that line, it has its pleasure for a season. Even God admits, in a certain way and for a certain time until it gets a hold of you and destroys you. It does have its pleasure. Yeah, there's a poem I heard once. There's this, it's called Passion for Christ Movement, and it is a slam poetry festival of Christians. But there's this guy, it's a poem called Almost, and he says, Satan is the father of lies, and here's proof. He only tells lies that are almost the truth. Oh. And, I think there's a lot of that to it, right? You're like, it has a function, and God says we're supposed to use everything that's put here on the earth for us. So, and, we're actually starting to find with some of the drugs, they actually have some pretty positive benefits in small doses. Like they're starting to microdose people with hallucinogens, and they found out that it helps military vets with PTSD and women who are leaving domestic violence situations. It's also really good for people with major depressive episodes. Right. I think there's a lot of things that aren't bad in moderation, but we don't tend to be a country of moderation for anything, right? If one aspirin will take care of my headache, then I'll take 10 of them. How many other countries have like hundreds of people every year that die from aspirin, right? Because we don't even do that in moderation. And I think that's one of the problems is we live in a country that is very me. Right. The way I explain it is I became an atheist at a very young age because of all the abuse and everything else. I grew up, in my church, my family was like the pillar, right? My dad was an elder in the church, and we were, we did talks as a family. We would model what it looks like to be a family having a Bible study together sometimes during church. And all I knew is how fake our family was. My mom and dad would also scream and cuss at each other. And as soon as the front tires touched the church parking lot, would go all big smiles. Hi, brother, so-and-so, how you doing? It was like this complete flip. And they were also pretty judgmental. And so were a lot of people in the church. And that's kind of what I associated, and the babysitter that molested me was from our church. And so I was like, obviously there's not a God who cares about me or these things wouldn't be happening, so I went the exact opposite way. And I will tell you, as an atheist, it's very, very easy to get wrapped up into everything that excess offers. Yeah. I always say I was a hedonist, right? I was here to pleasure me because at the end of when I died, I turned to dust and nothing I did mattered anyway. And that's a pretty depressing way to live. Yeah. So it didn't matter if I hurt you or I hurt somebody else. As long as I was happy, that's all I really cared about. And I lived that way for a really, really long time. Wow. I ended up trying to get away from the drugs. And I moved from Branson to Springfield, which doesn't sound a long way. And I did some dirt in Springfield too, but I didn't have the reputation here that I had back in Branson. And I ended up finding out that the GED that I got while I was in prison, I scored high enough to get scholarships, and I used that and started working in restaurants, and I immediately was a blackout drinker.
that it would switch straight from injecting substances into my system to drinking every night to the point that I'd black out. I mean, I would go out, and if there wasn't an after party, I would have the after party at my place. But I went to college, and I kept a job. I mean, I bartended and waited tables for years, and I had a son. He was a year old. And my dad died by suicide. My dad is one of those guys who had gotten like I said, he'd gotten sober. He turned his life around, but he had a diagnosis of bipolar disorder, and he would get put on medication. He would take his medication for a time, and then he would be like, you know what, man, I feel great. God's going to take care of me from here. And he would stop taking his medication. And a couple months later, he would have a manic episode followed by a huge crash. And he yo-yoed like that for years at the end.
Wow.
That's another thing that when I talk, especially something faith-based, I really want to get out there is I believe God gives us all giftings, right? It says that we're not all going to be like a nose or an ear, right? We make up the body of Christ. And for some people, God gives the ability to be therapists or counselors. For some people, God gives them the wisdom and the intelligence to create things like say, medications. Mm-hmm. And yet, for some weird reason, with behavioral health, like with mental health diagnoses and substance use, we just believe that all we really get not we. There's some people out there who are like, well, all you got to do is pray it away. If you believe in Jesus enough, you won't be depressed. Have you read the newspaper lately? I mean, have you looked outside or driven across your town lately? Unfortunately, there's a lot of stuff out there that can cause depression in people.
Oh, yeah.
And anxiety. And as polarized as our country is, against each other, it seems like we always have two sides, and those two sides are as far to the right and left as they can possibly get about whatever it is, right? Whether it's politics or marijuana or how we help the homeless.
Absolutely. Oh, I was going to say, I also suffer from bipolar disorder. I'm more on I'm more on the depression side that I suffer from, but I'm on medication for it. I'm on some pretty strong medication, and it's the best stuff that's ever worked for me. And I still get episodes, but they're like very far and few between. But sometimes when they hit, they kick me on my behind. But when I would share with someone, hey, I'm going through this, and I ask for prayer. I used to do that like on Facebook, and I had a few people would come back, and it was almost like they were slamming me, saying, oh, don't claim that you have bipolar. You need to pray it away, and you need to, and like this name it and claim it kind of garbage. And I was like, look, I have bipolar disorder. It's like, even if I don't believe I have it, it's still there, It's not, and I tell people it's not going anywhere. There is no cure for it. Unfortunately, there's no cure for it. But, you have, over time, you have to learn how to manage it and how to live with it and control it. Because, I used to let it control me, and it used to get me into so much trouble in the past. There's a lot of similarities between some things that you went through and some things that I went through. But I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, ahead. You're fine.
Okay.
No, you bring up an interesting point. My wife says I'm kind of like the dog in Up, like squirrel. So we'll try to get back to where I was eventually. But you bring up an interesting point. We need to stop shaming people to ask for help. I think there's a lot to be said for the power of prayer, but I also believe sometimes God's answer is not yet or no. Right. And once again, I think of that story about the guy in the house in the flood. I'm sure you guys have heard that, right? Where there's a guy, there's a flood, and he's standing on his porch and the water's starting to come up, and he's like, man, it's too high for my car to get out. I'm going to pray to God. And this guy comes by in a canoe, and he's like, hey man, hop in. We can get you out of here. And he's like, no, I'm praying to God. God will take care of me. And the water keeps rising. He's on the second story looking out the window, and this guy comes by in a boat. And he's like, man, hop in here. You need to get out of here. And he's like, no, I'm praying to God. God's going to save me. And next thing you know, he's on a roof and a guy comes by with a helicopter and they're like, here, grab this rope. And he's like, no, I'm good. God's got me. And then he dies. Of course, he drowns and he gets to heaven and he's like, God, I was praying to you. Why didn't you save me? And he's like, man, I sent you a canoe, a boat, and a helicopter. What more do you want from me? Right. So I think that's why we have those things out there, though. I mean, it is sometimes, yes, prayer is amazing, but you know what? I also feel like we live in a time where we don't have a whole lot of miracles. They do happen, but I believe in the United States, especially where we have so much, where literally our country throws out enough food to feed the rest of the world, to feed the entire planet, you know, that it's kind of selfish almost sometimes, right? I'm like, you know what, God, I'm going to pray for other people. I don't even really pray for anything other than to be God's hands and feet, because I feel like God's already given me more than enough. You know, my wife hates that sometimes.
What I don't see enough of, and, you know, my wife and I, you know, we still volunteer as much as we possibly can. But before COVID hit, we were volunteering a lot. You know, and we were, there's an organization we were volunteering with, Feed My Starving Children. We still do. And what that is you ship these packets of it's rice with mixed dried vegetables in there, and there's soy and vitamins that all gets mixed in there. And then when they get the packets in these third world countries, all they have to do is add water to it, boil it up, mix it, and it's nutrition for these children. And the results have been tremendous, because like they'll show us, you know, this little child, how they were nothing but skin and bones. And then 6 months later, they're a healthy weight, you know, and the kid is happy, they're healthy. And so, and it's a Christian ran organization. So, my wife and I, we just love doing that. We love doing things like that. We've volunteered before with like United Way. They had a program called Hunger Backpacks, where what we did was we actually had these backpacks that we filled with food, and then they would deliver them to the elementary schools in the Phoenix area, and those backpacks would be given to children. Less fortunate children from poor families and stuff. That way, over the weekend, those kids had food. They had food to eat. They didn't have to worry about, oh, where's my next meal coming from? They had food to get them through the weekend at least. So, you know, things like that. We also volunteer, you know, with St. Mary's Food Bank, and we enjoy doing those things. And my whole thing is like, yes, it's great that we help other countries and things like that, and that, you know, we do stuff like that, make sure that those people have food. But I don't know. I don't see enough going on to help the homeless here in America. I don't. And that really, and it really bothers me, especially when you hear about, you know, 1 point, whatever it is, trillion dollars being used for, you know, that the spending bill, you know, that just came. It's like, why not use that money to help Americans? You know, why not use that money to help, you know, homeless people? You know, there's people out there, they're homeless because they have mental conditions. Why not get those people some help? You know, some counseling, some therapy, maybe even some medication. Get these people some kind of housing, you know, give them job skills, give them jobs, help them get on their feet. I don't see none of that.
No, you're preaching to the choir. Like I've always said, my mission field is here.
Right.
In the United States. And it kills me that people will pay $5,000 to like fly to Haiti, or Cuba or Vietnam or some other country, but they won't put 50 cents in gas in their car and go somewhere in their own community to help somebody.
Right.
You know, I think that's a big problem. I don't think it's as pretty, and I can't brag about it as much and feel as pious if I'm doing something in my own backyard as if I'm going to another country and doing it.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I had somebody I was talking to about the medication thing, and they were just going off. They're like, all you need is Jesus. And I just looked at them and I said, how small is your God? And they were like, my God's huge. I'm like, so your God can do anything. And he was like, yeah. And I was like, so why did you get chemo when you had cancer? I'm like, if God can cure depression or anxiety just through prayer, are you telling me he can't cure cancer? So why didn't you just pray and not go see a doctor? Right? Of course, pray, but then go see somebody that specializes in it to get help. Was kind of my point to him. I'm like, either your God is so tiny that he can only fix this, or you know what, prayer is important, but so is using the giftings God's given other people.
Right.
And I'm going to get off that rant and put it in my back pocket.
No, that's so important. I mean, we talked about that. What was it, Dave, in the first show? That, whenever we get to a point where we need help, I mean, I'm also that person that is not mechanically inclined. I like that meme on Facebook that, the guy pops the hood and he says, yep, that's the engine. That's me. And, I'm not gonna dig in there and try to fix that myself. If I have a leak in my bathroom, man, I am not going to go turn the water off and start pulling apart the plumbing. That's not my gift. It's not, I have no clue what I'm doing, so why is it so different if we go to somebody, if, we have a backache or a leg ache or something? Why is it so different if we have a heartache? How is it different to go to somebody who, preferably, obviously a Christian, but somebody who has studied and spent years in this field, and somebody who can give you tools that will help you through that. I think it was the last one, the one that Dave missed. I was talking to a lady named Ashley, and I said that whenever I first told my dad I was depressed as a teenager, he didn't know how to handle it. So there was this long pause, and he just kind of said, "Have you read your Bible lately?" And I think we've all gotten that so much. I had a guy right here at work just tell me that I'm not healed, and I've suffered chronic pain for over 30 years. He said, "You're not healed because you don't really believe." You need to get to a deeper level of belief. And
we wonder why, what does that Pew report say? Like half the kids are leaving the church when they get older. We wonder why that happens. We wonder why, it should be, it's not for the perfect people that look down on everybody else, right? It's supposed to be kind of a hospital, really, for people that aren't well, and I think that's one of the issues that we see sometimes is it's not that stinking way. But it's a way for me to look down on other people and feel better about myself.
Right.
Like, I may, it bugs me. Me and my wife have discussion all the time. I'm like, so why does a pastor stand up there and call out people for, say, sexual immorality and, substance use, but doesn't call out the person that weighs 400 pounds?
He calls them out by name?
No, but I'm saying they're like, if you're struggling with this or this, I don't hear him saying, hey, if you're struggling with obesity and sloth and, gluttony, come talk to me. We have
a bad attitude.
Sins.
Yeah. Right. A bad attitude, which is, I think, to me, it smells more in God's nostrils and sometimes than just out and out sin does. Just a rotten, foul attitude.
And I appreciate a pastor that'll sit there and admit, hey, I struggle with this stuff too. You know what I mean? Because I've been in churches where these people put their pastors up on a pedestal, like Pastor so-and-so is so great and so wonderful and he can do no wrong. It's like you people forget he's a human being too. He's flawed. He makes mistakes just like we all do, And so I appreciate a pastor who can say, hey, I screw up too, guys, but you know what? I take it to the Lord. I pray, I ask forgiveness and mercy, and he grants it to me, and you can do the same.
Well, and to take it just a little bit in different direction, I was there at Chains Unchained, David, when you spoke, and when you speak at a Christian heavy metal festival, it's always interesting because everybody back in the merch tables is talking, and you got people literally walking in front of you and setting up the stage. And I remember because I spoke there too, and I remember thinking, wondering how you felt about that. And I kind of laughed and I said, yeah, he probably won't be back to a Christian metal festival considering that there's like 12 people that are listening. And then you went to Rock in the River and said something that really, and I think you were leading towards this a while ago, but we distracted ourselves. But whenever you said that you didn't have an addiction problem, you had a trauma problem. And I immediately text my wife and I said, David just said this was, I mean, that was pretty amazing.
Yeah. And how you were saying, people walking around, and it's funny because like later on, Tony and I, because I stayed at his place when I was at Rock in the River, we were talking about it, and he said what he wants to start doing maybe this next year is put some kind of a curtain up in front of the stage after a band is done. And so so that they can do what they're doing, because not only was the staging going on, bands, tearing down and other bands setting up while people like David were speaking, but the hip hop guys, they were out there trying to, do their thing, and you had all of that going on in the background. So, I'm just saying he wants to have some kind of a curtain up so that people aren't distracted by all that. And that way they'll pay attention to the speakers and pay attention to the hip hop guys. So just wanted to throw that out there.
And you stayed on topic, which, I think it's funny because when I went back and looked at, I just spoke for 7 minutes at Chains Unchained, but when I went back and looked at that video, I was surprised at how much activity there was going on. Because I mean, David, the Holy Spirit speaks through you, and I was like blissfully unaware of any of it. I was just talking straight to those people. So I mean, I did want to commend you for that, because that what you said really did speak to me.
And see, sometimes what'll happen also, I'm sorry, is I've noticed also at some of these festivals I've been to, when a band gets done playing, everybody goes outside, or everybody goes into a different area and they're congregating and all that. And it's like, no, stick around, listen to these speakers. These guys got important stuff to say. They have things where, you'd be surprised, they can, you can relate to them and they can relate to you, Like I was saying, there's some similarities, David, between what you've gone through in the past in your life, what I've gone through, what Rob's gone through. We all went through some pretty messed up things. So, and I just think it's important for people to stick around and listen,
Right. Yeah, it's I do feel like we need to be more transparent as a church.
Yes.
Kind of what you were talking about. I think I talked about that a little bit at Chains Unchained. Oh no, at Rock in the River too, is the fact that, there's people dying next to us in the pew, but because we dress up, church is kind of like Instagram anymore. People dress up and they put big permagrins on and they walk in and they act like they don't have a care in the world.
Yeah.
While the person next to them is dying, but they're afraid to say anything because they're looking and going, well, obviously I don't have enough faith. And if they do say something, maybe that's even what they hear from somebody. Well, if you believed in God, you wouldn't have all these problems.
I've heard that too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Belief in God doesn't alleviate problems, or the people in countries like Iran and Iraq and South Korea, North Korea, my bad. In North Korea, where literally they might get killed if it was discovered they were a Christian. They wouldn't be living on dirt floors in poverty. They would have, they'd have the Joel Osteen smiling mansion, right? If all it took was faith. But you know what? God doesn't say that things are going to be rough. In the Bible, it says that we're supposed to daily pick up our cross and follow him. And I don't think the cross was a very pleasurable experience.
No.
Right?
Well, no, it was heavy. I mean, he had to have help carrying it. Absolutely. It was very heavy. Yeah.
So I'm going to jump back to where I was like forever ago.
Sorry.
So no, I mean, I'm the one that derailed, and I think it's been great conversation too. Yeah. Thank you. But my dad had died by suicide, and I finally found something that I couldn't use the pain away. And even though at this time I was getting ready to start grad school, I graduated with honors in the middle of my addiction. I had a son that was 1, and I broke up with his mom and said, listen, I don't want him around me like this. So, she was not letting me see my son. And I'd worked with this kid for years. And he looked at me and he's like, man, I've never seen you this low since you've been working here. He's like, I would love for you to go with me and Becca to church Sunday. And I looked at him and laughed. And I'm like, dude, you were lucky to get me into church for your wedding. I don't do church. Can't stand church. I can't stand Christians. And a couple weeks later, he invited me again. And I said no. And a couple weeks after that, his wife was in eating lunch with him. And she's like, hey, David, I saw you're off Sunday. Me and Nate are going to a free concert, free barbecue. You want to meet us there? And I was like, oh my God, yeah, I love barbecue. I love live music. And she said, great, it's after church. So I went to church, and I went to church because by this time I was agnostic, not an atheist. That's a whole nother story about how the shadow people I saw on meth became a constant companion. And I figured out that's probably some kind of an evil spirit. So there's probably something here other than just us. But I have no idea what's out there. But I was one of those angry ones, right? I like to belittle Christians for their faith. Oh, you have to believe in a fairy tale in the sky to get through. Look at me. I'm living my life just great. Yeah. But that's what I did. And yet they still loved on me, and they were still nice to me, and they didn't judge me for it. They loved on me where I was at, instead of saying, hey, you need to stop doing this. So I was like, you know what? They invited me, and they're both super awesome. So I'm going to go. I mean, the fact they invited me to my wedding, to their wedding, knowing the type of person I was at that time, blew me away. And I remember, like, I went into church, and the first song they played was Cry Out to Jesus by Third Day, that literally talks about addiction in the song. And the sermon was about Paul. And I remember, hearing the good I want to do, I do not do. No, it's the evil I do not want to do. That is what I do. And all I could think of is how much I disappointed my family. And, even though I didn't want to continue disappointing them and letting them down, I still did. And, I went to the concert, and it was fun, had barbecue, met some really nice people. It wasn't the judgmental church that I remembered. And when I got done, they were like, so what do you think? And I'm like, I'm not going to drink your Kool-Aid, but you know what? It was nice hanging out with people that cared about me with no strings attached.
Yeah. And
people caring for me and loving on me that didn't say, hey, you have to stop doing this for us to be nice to you. I was like, so you know what? I'm probably going to come back. So I made a friend there. I live in enemy territory. I'm an Illinois kid, so I'm a Cubs fan, a Bears fan, a Bulls fan, a Blackhawks fan. There was a guy that went to that church everybody called Chicago Mike, and they called it Celebrate Recovery, but it was really more like a book study during first service.
Okay.
And Mike had talked to me about it because they introduced me to him because of our love of Chicago sports. And I was like, if I'm off on Sundays, I'll start coming to first service for their Celebrate Recovery, because by this time I was working at a treatment center on a practicum, and I was full on in the midst of my addiction. And if I went to like a meeting out in the community, I would bump into clients. So I was like, I can probably go there and be honest and not bump into clients. And then second service, I'd hang out with Nate and Becca, and then we'd go out to eat, and they'd love on me. So I did that for several months. And one night I am pulling out of a bar, and a cop pulls out behind me, and I'm just like, God, if you're real and you let me not get pulled over, I swear I will start going to church every Sunday. And, I took a corner. He turned with me. God, if you're real, you let me not get pulled over, I will start going to church every Sunday, and I'll stop drinking. And every time we turned, I'd add something, because I knew if I got pulled over, I'd get a DUI. If I got a DUI, they'd kick me out of my practicum. If they kicked me out of my practicum, they'd kick me out of grad school. It wasn't anywhere near a rock bottom. That's another thing that I want to say is rock bottom's dead. So let's not wait until people hit rock bottom. Let's love on them where they're at. Right.
Yeah.
So by the time I turned onto my road, like I was going to start going to church every Sunday. I was going to give up drinking, drugs, cussing, premarital sex, cigarettes, and when fighting, I mean, just the whole gamut. There was a lot of corners. So when I pulled onto my street, he kept going straight. I pulled into my garage, closed the door behind me, and I passed out in my car, which is something I did a lot back then. But when I woke up, I actually remembered the night before. And the voice that's talked to me my entire life was like, why would you try to stop using again just to fail? You're just going to let everybody down again. And it happened to be Super Bowl Sunday, and I had plans to go to one of my friends' houses where everybody drank and everybody smoked. And I took a shower. I was already beat, hopped into my car, and I started driving to Josh's house. And on the way there, the Rolling Stones came on the radio, which is important to me because I can't stand the Rolling Stones. And I immediately started looking for something else to listen to. And I came to a dead spot on the radio, and I was like, oh, I'll see what's on next. And the first words out of the speaker were, I wish you could see me now. I wish I could show you how I'm not who I was. Later on, I found out it's a song, I'm Not Who I Was by Brandon Heath. And I heard a voice that I'd never heard before that said, go home, David, you can do this. And I pulled over to the side of the road and I bawled, and I turned around and I went home, and I called the associate pastor who I'd kind of clicked with a little bit. He was a former atheist. I was like, man, can I come in and see you tomorrow? And the next day I came in and saw him, and I got saved, and I gave my life to Christ. And I haven't drank since then. I haven't used an illicit drug since then. I met my wife about a month later. We dated for a year and didn't do anything until our wedding night. I've been in one fight since, and it was in a boxing ring for a fundraiser. I've cussed a few times, but it's progress, not perfection. But I mean, God removed everything from my path. And, I poured myself into Christ, kind of like I had my addiction. And honestly, it's amazing what God can do. I almost had like a Pauline conversion, but it's because I kind of met my Ananias. That's what I call Nate and Becca, is my Ananias. Like, here's this mean, angry kid that drinks and does drugs and makes fun of Christians, and they loved on me anyway. And if it wasn't for their love and a question they asked me one time, because everywhere I went, people would be like, man, what's wrong with you? Why do you do this? And, I was sitting there talking to Becca one time, and she looked at me and she was like, what happened to you? And it was the first time that I really talked about a lot of the trauma that I'd gone through. There's a lot of things we don't talk about, right? I mean, I was a 7th grader. I got raped by a college kid who invited me over to his house to party. And I felt really cool because here's a college kid. I'm getting ready to go into 7th grade. And to me, that was the coolest thing ever. I didn't talk about those things. But, eventually what I found out is a lot of people have gone through the same experience as I have, mm-hmm. Yep. And they're not talking about it either. And by us talking about it and the ability to overcome it, right? Like, yes, God removed those things from me, but you know what? I still went and did EMDR to work on the trauma. And I still needed that to get that constant trauma out of my head. I needed to see a professional.
Oh, yeah. Right. And sometimes by talking about it, that actually can start the healing process. I mean, I know for me, talking about it with people has greatly helped me. And, sometimes you just have to do that because sometimes, that trauma, we bottle it up inside and we never really try to address it or work with it, get it worked out. And it's weird because even to this day, even though I got a lot of help in the past, and, I put all my faith in the Lord, and I gave everything of my past to the Lord. Every once in a while, it doesn't matter what I'm doing. It's like a memory will pop in. And sometimes it could be like maybe something bad I did. And I find myself starting to feel guilty about it again. And it's like, right. And I'm like, and I have to remind myself, the Lord has forgiven me for that. If the Lord has forgiven me, I need to forgive myself. And not be guilty about this thing that I did so long ago, and I know that it's just an attack from the enemy. It's just the enemy comes out of nowhere and wants to attack you like that. And we just have to notice that. But yeah, like I was saying, and you touched on it is, talking about it and how some people, they don't want to talk about it, and that's fine. If someone doesn't want to talk about it, that's their, that's their choice, obviously. But I just feel that, speaking from personal experience, talking about it can really help with the healing process.
Right. And I know one thing that has helped me a lot is trying to define who I was in Christ, exactly what God thinks of me. Because, I thought for a long time, that he was just this big, uncaring, orbic being or something, and he didn't really care. And then I was with somebody at the mall one time, and there was a little boy there, and it was a dad, and he was just, he was so loving. You could tell he was so patient, and his kid would fall and he'd set him back up and he'd hug him and wipe his tears and, okay, keep going, and he loved him so much. And the guy that I was with, he said, man, you see how much that guy loves his kid? He said, God loves you like, times infinity more than that. And I think it's not just the sin in our background, but I think it's so important that we try to not only remind ourselves, but other people, you are not only are you not your past, but you're not those self-deprecating feelings that you have about yourself. I grew up, and in the 70s, it seemed like only 2 or 3 kids in every class were overweight. And so I grew up and I look back at pictures of myself and I think I wasn't fat at all, but yet I grew up being called that. So I still have that in my head. And it's really, really important that instead of looking within ourselves, we try to define ourselves. I've done Google searches, just how much does God love me? Bible verse, and just read them. And I think that's so, that's so uplifting. That's so encouraging if we do that, not only, like I said, for us, but for others as well, because they don't see that. They don't see that every man is a prince. They don't see that every woman is a princess, because we're children of the King, and people that they either don't realize it or forget it.
Yeah, I talk to people about this too, and this is something I use to encourage people, because we are going to slip and fall, right? We're going to have things, but hopefully we surround ourselves with good supports and we build a foundation. But imagine like you have a son and your son lies to you, but you knew that your son was only going to lie to you 11 times before he never lied to you again. Each time he lied to you, would you be upset, or would you be like, woohoo, 2 down, 9 more lies, never going to lie to me again? So God is omnipresent.
Yes.
Right. And what that means is God lives in all time at once. He's eternal, and it blows minds. But if you talk to really smart people that do math, they will tell you for something to be eternal, it has to live in all time at the same time. So God knows, right, beginning, the end. God knows how many times, say, somebody that uses drugs is going to have a recurrence before they never have one again. He knows how many times you're going to, on Monday or Saturday after you get off work and let off, that you're going to look at pornography on your computer. And every time you have a slip, they're not up there going, oh my God, look at this guy. They're up there cheering. They're like, woohoo, only 3 more times and that's never going to happen again. So I like to think that we have an entire cheerleading section with all the angels up there that are so excited every time one of those things happens, because that's one more time closer to us never doing it again.
Right. That's a great way to look at it.
It is.
Yeah, it
Absolutely.
really is. Well, as we kind of wind down here, David, I wonder if you could speak for just a minute into the lives of somebody who is watching this and going, dude, that's me. Right there, that's me. I've got this unspeakable trauma. I've got this addiction. I've got whatever, and then maybe pray for that person if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah. So I don't believe that there is anything that we can't get through, right? And it's not the way some people think. Some people are like, like I hear people say, like, God lifted my addiction or whatever it is from me. To me, if God completely took that away from me, I would never have a craving again. There's days I still crave, but I don't obsess over things 24/7 like I used to. I almost go back to biblical, where Paul says, I have a thorn in my side, a seed of Satan, and it's there to remind me, of that and just how great God's love is. But I believe that there's a shift and a movement that's happening in our church. Where we are getting people that are a lot more open to meeting and working with people. I think there's a lot more empathetic people and a lot more caring people within the church. But to me, I mean, if you're sitting there and you're like, this is me and this is never going to change, I will tell you that was me too. I knew that I was going to be dead before I was 21. Every year I lived after 21 to me was a curse, not a blessing. I've tried suicide. I wasn't even good enough at that. I lived through it. People found me in time. Just know that man, people out there truly care. I love you. I don't care what you've done. I don't care the choices you've made. I don't care the things that have happened to you. I love you, and I probably don't even know you. And if I feel that way about you, I guarantee there's other people in your life that love you too, that want to help you and support you in any way they possibly can. So I would just say, you know what, be open and honest about your needs and what they are. Don't be like me and live for, over 3 decades without ever talking about the trauma that you experienced and keeping that inside. Please realize that just because you may use drugs, or maybe you eat till you're sick every single time, that honestly, that's not really what the problem is. And until you figure out a way to address that problem and get people to help you in your life to do it, that it's going to continue being that way. Right. I mean, that's what I would say. Is seek out help. I mean, get a hold of us, get a hold of Rob and Dave, reach out to my nonprofit, reach out to somebody at your church. And if nobody there helps, continue reaching out, bang on doors until you get that help. But just know that God loves you and that Jesus died. And when he died, it gave us a clean slate. It forgave everything that we've ever done and everything that's ever been done to us. It's an amazing thing to live a life with no regrets. But I have 0 regrets about my life because it put me where I am today. And where I am today, I have an amazing relationship with Christ, my wife, I have children, I have all these things that I never would have had if I wouldn't have gone through everything I went through. Yeah. Everything happens for a reason, but a lot of times we're ashamed or afraid to ask for that help or to reach out. Yep. And one of the best ways to do that is to reach out in prayer. Absolutely. Absolutely. Just to ask God for that, to put the people in your life that you need and the support that you need.
Yep. Yep. You're right. You're right. And, David, once again, Rob and I, we thank you very, very much for coming on the show today, brother, and sharing your testimony. And just want to let you guys know, be sure to tune in to Out of the Grave with Rob and Dave every Wednesday at 10 a.m. Central on gospelrockinradio.com, the grr. And
I have to do, I have to do that every time.
Oh, absolutely, man. That claw. Yeah.
That's just fun.
Yeah. And you guys can also, you can find us on anchor.fm, /out of the grave. And
Spotify.
Yep. We're also on Spotify, and we are on YouTube, Out of the Grave with Rob and Dave.
We're everywhere, dude.
Yep. And as I always like to say, guys, be blessed and be a blessing to others. And we'll catch you next time. God bless.